All right, good morning. Thanks for being here again. So just as a reminder, last week, if you missed last week, it's fine because we're starting kind of a new section of our story. Our story starts with Abraham, really. That's really where this series is supposed to start, with that one guy. We saw that the world started, of course, with Adam and Eve, and then it got very big, and then it got very small again after the flood and Noah's time, and 8 people came through the flood, right? And then they populated the whole world, and then it got so big and so sinful that God decided to start with one family. And he begins developing a relationship with this one family. And the family is the family of Abraham and Sarah, and that's where we left off. We're just going to meet them today, and we've heard about them, but I think that there's some things that we don't know about them that we'll find out. So the rest of the Hebrew scriptures then, leading up to the New Testament, of course, is going to be the tracing of this person's descendants. And I always call it like a thread. If you could picture a giant tapestry, there's threads going this way, and there's threads going this way. And there's if you just picture like a tapestry with just one maybe gold thread going through it, it might weave its way down, but that's the thread of salvation history. Those are the names of the people on the genealogy that we read last week from Matthew's gospel. Luke has a genealogy too, at the beginning, I think, is it around at the beginning of chapter 4? It traces Jesus all the way back to Adam, because Luke wants everybody to know that the Savior has come for them, everybody. Matthew, though, who we read genealogy last week, only takes him back to Abraham because his agenda is different. He wants to make sure that we know that this person, Jesus, right, who's at the other end of that story from Abraham, is both the king of the kingly tribe of David and also a Jewish person. Because I always say to my students, to be the Jewish king, you have to be what? Jewish. And you have to be from the kingly tribe, right? The kingly tribe. So we have to trace him through David to Abraham for him to be who we say he is, which is the son of David, the king of all creation, the king of eternity, right? He's reigning right now. And so we're gonna look at the Hebrew scriptures over the next month, and we're gonna tell our story, how we get from Abraham to Jesus. And today we'll start, of course, with Abraham. Abraham was a place called Ur, U-R, a very small little name of a town. And it was called Ur of the Chaldeans. And it's an important center of civilization in what was then called Mesopotamia. And I feel like we all heard of Mesopotamia when we were really young in our history classes. It's such a big word, Mesopotamia, six syllables, right? And from grade school, I remember hearing that. It was an overwhelmingly big word back then when we were little kids. And when Abraham was 75 years old, he got a call from God to go to a land that God would show him, right? So this is what it says. And I love this. I kind of mentioned this because our reading on Sunday, just a couple days ago, was about Abraham. The Lord said to Abram, his name is Abram still. It's going to get lengthened. It's going to get a longer name. When God changes your name, it means that he's got a new purpose for you in the scriptures. Simon, Peter, right? Saul of Tarsus, Paul, St. Paul. Abram, Abraham, go forth from your land and your relatives and your father's house to a land that I will show you. So start walking and I'll tell you when to stop. And I think that's incredible, because who would do that, right? Who would ever be okay? And I say, how often did he look up and say, are we there yet? Are we there yet? How far are we going? Because God said, but that's why Abraham is so special, because he didn't ask those questions. He just went. He trusted in God. And he doesn't even know God yet, because God hasn't even revealed who he is. And remember, the place that he came from, they were many gods. So he's following one of basically who he thinks are many gods. Just this one happens to be speaking to me specifically. So, that's the one I'm going to follow. So he said, and go to the land that I will show you. And then he says to him, he says, I'm going to make you a great nation. I'm going to make out of you 75 years old and your wife who's 65 years old. It's a 10-year difference between the two of them. I'm going to make a great nation out of you. Okay, well, you're getting a late start, right? My brother and his wife had twins when my brother was 48 years old. I know, right? They're 3 years old now. He's 51. But, Abraham was way older, and it worked out for him too. So he said, I'm going to make you a great nation out of you, and they don't even have one child yet, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great. And how many thousands of years are we? We're still talking about him, right? That's what this series starts about, Abraham. I'm going to make your name great, that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. And all the families of the earth, this is the most important blessing, will find a blessing in you. So you're going to bless all the nations of the earth, or at least have the opportunity to if we receive that blessing through his descendant. So this is kind of called connecting the dots of the Old Testament. Hopefully at the end of this series, when we've connected all those dots, we have a picture of Jesus. That's what those dots should connect for us, okay? This is the first dot, Abraham. And Abraham went. And Lot, his nephew, went with him because Abraham was the firstborn of 3 children, 3 sons. And one of them kind of disappears from the story early on. And one of them died and left a son that Abraham kind of adopted, right, as his nephew. And he left and he took his wife Sarai and his nephew and all of his possessions. And they went to this place called, eventually, Canaan is the name of the place, right? And he says, this is going to be your land someday, as far as the eye can see in every direction, right? Abraham did as the Lord directed him, packed up his wife, Sarai, his nephew, Lot, and started traveling, a faith walk, right? And then one day, because he likes to sit under trees. I just think that's pretty funny. Abraham is shown sitting under trees a number of times. He likes the shade, but he's an outdoorsy guy. He lives in tents. They're nomadic people, right? They don't have a home that they live. They move around a lot. And he's sitting under an oak tree one day, and God says to him again, I'm going to make your descendants great, and I'm going to give you this land. This is going to be your land. But he doesn't even own a square foot of it yet. And it belongs to other people, right? No, he doesn't own any of it. He's a foreigner. He's an alien in a foreign land at this point. So a little while later, there's a famine in the land. And this is going to be a recurring thing that happens to his great-grandchildren also. In the story of Joseph, where there's a famine in the land of Canaan and they go down to Egypt, where they eventually become slaves under Moses. We're going to get to that, not today. But there was a famine in the land which forced Abram and Sarai to go down to Egypt. So you can see that there's a recurring thing that happens, to this family, and they become extremely rich down there, very, very wealthy. And when they returned to Canaan, there was a war going on between 9 kings that all owned part of the Holy Land. There were 9 kings, 5 against 4. And they were fighting with each other, probably over the land. And somewhere in that war, their nephew is kidnapped. Lot is kidnapped and held for a ransom. Abram somehow, because of this vast wealth that he's accumulated down in Egypt, is able to muster an army that defeats the 4 kings that were the evil side of the war, I guess, and they free his nephew, and all of a sudden, he's a hero because no one else has been able to do this and conquer these 4 evil kings, not even the 5 other good kings. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, something really cool happens. And there's a guy that shows up, and his name is Melchizedek. And you've probably heard his name if you regularly go to Mass. His name appears in the Psalms. His name appears in the book of Hebrews, but we don't know much about him. He comes out of nowhere, mysteriously, does the strangest thing, which I'm going to tell you about, and his name is Melchizedek. So listen to all that we know about him. This is what we know about him. But again, and I hope that, and this may not be happening yet, but if things are kind of like connecting for you, like if you hear images or symbols or things that are familiar from another part of the Bible, is that a coincidence? No, never, ever, never. This is Genesis chapter 14. Here we go. Abram recovered all of his possessions. He recovered his nephew Lot and his possessions. When Abram returned from this defeat of the kings, and the kings who were allied with him were with him, Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought bread and wine. Bread and wine, right? Does that sound familiar? Yes, bread and wine. That's what we use here every single day, or every single week, Sunday for sure. He was the king of Salem, which is Jerusalem. It was just called Salem at that time. So he's the king of Jerusalem. But Jerusalem doesn't exist as Jerusalem at this moment. And he brought out bread and wine. And he was also, and this is the weirdest part, the priest of God Most High. He blessed Abraham with these words. Blessed be Abram by God Most High. He's blessing him. In the name of God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who delivered your foes into your hand. And Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. So that's all we know about this guy, and he disappears as quickly as he appeared. But he's the king and priest, and those are this series is called Priests, Prophets, and Kings. Those are the three offices that are like available at this time. And you were never more than one of those things. You could only be one or the other. You were never more than one. But we have this guy who is the king of Salem, the priest of God Most High. So there's two, and he's prophetic in his blessing of Abram, that God is blessing Abram. So he's actually all three of those things. The only other person that we would say are all of those things is Jesus. And then everyone in this room at our baptism are anointed as priest, prophet, and king, because we're allowed to be more than one. In fact, we're expected to be all three of those as Christians, right? Because we're another Christ in the world. Priestly, prophetic, and kingly, all at the same. Priest, prophet, and kings. So the king of Jerusalem, meaning the king of peace. What do we call Jesus? The Prince of Peace, right? Literally, this guy is Melchizedek, the king of peace, bringing bread and wine to Abram, right? It's almost like maybe this guy is somehow divine. You know, he's so mysterious. And the unusual gifts of bread and wine that Jesus is going to use as the perpetual reminder for us of his presence in the world. And he gives it to Abram, almost to encourage him and to affirm who he is and how special he is, right? After he does what he came to do, he disappears and is gone, never to be seen again. There he goes. But why do we have him? Why is that included? I don't think it's included by accident. But it's one of those question marks that we just aren't going to know for sure. Sometime later, in Genesis 15, God makes an actual covenant with Abram. And this is, remember, I wasn't able to do this last week because of the live streaming, but I did it in the evening session. if two armies, if you're one army and you're one army, and Mark and I are the kings of each of these countries, me and him, we would walk together arm in arm up and down between the aisleway of the two armies, making a covenant with each other, promising to have peace with each other, and promising to defend each other, and promising to never attack each other again, and making all these promises in a covenant, which I did talk about, which was like you create a family tie there, more than just signing a contract, renting a car. Remember that from last week? So he took Abram outside and he told him to look up at the stars, Genesis 15. I'll read it for you. It's so beautiful. So just picture this scene in your minds. Sometime after, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not fear, Abram. I am your shield. I will make your reward very great. Abram said, Lord, what can you give me if I die childless and have only my servant as my heir? Abram said, look, you have given me no offspring. And this is years have passed. So he was 75 when he started out. Now he's much older. He said, my servant will be my heir. And the Lord said to him, no, that will not be your heir. Your own offspring will be your heir. He took him outside and said to him, look up at the sky and count the stars, if you can. Just so, he added, will your descendants be. So that's a great promise, but I don't even have one child yet. You're telling me I'm going to have descendants as numerous as the stars of the sky or the sand of the seashore. Somewhere else he said that, right? But Abraham put his faith in the Lord, who attributed to him that as an act of righteousness. That's why Abraham is called the father of our faith, because he was the most faithful person. Even in the sight of, how can this ever be possible? He still believed. He said, I am the Lord who brought you from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land as a possession. He said, how will I know that I will possess it? He said, bring these animals and these birds, cut them up. He's going to cut them up and create that walkway between. Well, there's no armies. It's just Abram and God. There's nobody to witness this. And the birds of prey swooped down to get them, but Abram scared them away. And this is the cool part. As the sun was about to set, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and a great dark dread descended upon him. Now, why? Because in the Old Testament times, you couldn't see God and live, right? Like the glory of God is just too much. That's why Adam and Eve, when they lost their glory of God that was all around them, the garments of light that they were wearing, they had to leave the garden and God stopped talking to them because they couldn't see that anymore. The sin had prevented that from being able to happen anymore. So Abram can't be fully awake and see the glory of God and still be alive. And God doesn't want to make a covenant with a dead guy, right? That's not his purpose to kill Abram that day, right? He's trying to bring an entire nation to life through this guy. So he puts a deep sleep kind of on. He puts him in this really deep trance. And then it says, a darkness came down and enveloped the entire scene. And this is cool. This is the only way God can protect Abram and still make a covenant with him at the same time. And he said, listen, then he tells him in this darkness, he whispers to him the future. And he said, know for certain that your descendants will reside as aliens in a land not their own, meaning Egypt, where they will be slaves and oppressed for 400 years, which we know comes to pass. But I will bring judgment on the nation they must serve. He doesn't say who it is, but it's Egypt. We know that. And after this, they will go out with great wealth, just like Abram and his wife had when they came back from Egypt. They were incredibly wealthy from down there. You, however, will go to the place of your ancestors, meaning you're going to die, but at a ripe old age, because everybody dies. In the 4th generation, your descendants will return here. And then it says, when the sun had set and it was dark, there appeared a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch that passed through. That's God. That's God's presence the glory of God. But Abram could hardly see it because he was in a trance and the darkness was so dark but the glory of God was still shining through that darkness, because the glory of God is like beyond anything that we could ever imagine, right? And it passed through. So Abram and God could pass through together without him dying in the process, this is one of my favorite images here. And God said, I'm going to give you this whole land. That's my promise to you. And think about this past weekend on the mountaintop of the Transfiguration, which we just had as our second Sunday gospel. The disciples were up there, and it said they got real sleepy, just like Abram was put into that trance. And then it said the cloud descended, and then God's glory was shining out of Jesus. Do you see the parallels there? He's there, and Jesus is the glow that's coming out of him is like the glory of God pushing itself to the surface. But just like he did for Abram, he does for Peter and James and John. He gets them into this trance-like state and brings down that cloud to make sure that they don't die in the process. Because Jesus goes up the hill with three of his key disciples and comes down because they're all dead on the top. That's not ever going to be the plan, right? Not at all. So God, when he makes your covenant with you, then he protects you in the process. And that's why I love this very much, this story. So God tells him about the slavery in Egypt, the Exodus, and the conquest of the land that they're going to have when they come back. Through this intense darkness, Abram saw the glory of God pass through the covenant walkway. God essentially was swearing an oath to Abram, right? But time continued to go by, though, and there's still not even one child. Abraham and Sarah are extremely patient people, right? They're not getting any younger. When Abram was 86 years old, so this is 11 years since the original calling to make the move. A lot happened in those 11 years, certainly. Sarah, and you might remember this story, she decides to take matters into her own hands. And she gives her maidservant, who's an Egyptian servant, to her husband to have a child with. But that's not going to be a good idea. We know that this is not going to turn out good because you're only supposed to have one wife. That was never, ever the plan was to have more than one wife. And whenever there's more than one wife, things look okay for a while, but down the road, everything falls apart. Polygamy was never part of God's plan. He gave Adam and Eve to each other, and that was it, right? So just remember that. So this woman's name is Hagar, and she's an Egyptian maidservant. She conceives a son named Ishmael, but this son was not that heir. He's not on the thread, that gold thread that weaves its way down from Abraham to Jesus. He's not on there. But 13 years later, when Abram is now, if you're doing the math, 99 years old, right? And Sarah's 89 years old, God comes to him again. Now, here's a scene that I love, and it's a scene that you may be familiar with. I'm going to walk away from this for a minute, and I hope you can still hear me. Can you still hear me? Okay. So he's sitting. Where is he sitting? He's actually sitting in his tent under an oak tree. Now he's at the entrance of his tent under the oak tree. And it's called Mamre, where he's at, M-A-M-R-E. And he is just happy as can be, and he's just looking out at the beautiful scenery, I guess. I don't know. He's 99. I mean, what's he doing? He's retired, I suppose, at this point, right? I hope. And he's looking out, and he sees three figures going by. And of course, he runs out. Hey, guys, what's going on? Because you're living in the desert, and hospitality is a very, very important thing. And you may or may not know this, but when you're living in this nomadic time, and your worst enemy came to your tent, knocked on the door of your tent at night and said, can you help me? You had to let that person in. Even your worst enemy, you had to let that person in. Now, you didn't have to leave them, they could sleep right inside the door, and you probably kept your eye on that person all night long, but you had to, because if they were left outside, they would die overnight. It was that harsh in the desert times.
So these are not his enemies already. Abraham doesn't have any enemies. Like, everybody literally loves this guy. Everybody loves him. And so he says, I see you're traveling. Come to my tent. You can, get washed up, and we'll cook for you and give you what you need. And they come. And you find out later that it's God and two angels in disguise as human beings. Okay? And he yells to the servants, bring some food, get some animals prepared for them to eat. Sarah, get, whatever. Do whatever you're going to do for these guys. And they sit around and they talk for a while with him. And they said to him, this is the best. They said to him, let me read it to you. Let me see where I'm at here. I'm going to go to Genesis chapter 17 now. We're flying through this book. 17. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, I am God the Almighty. Walk in my presence and be blameless. Between you and me I will establish my covenant. Abram fell face down, and God said to him, and what did he do when he fell face down? For my part, here is my covenant with you. You are to become the father of a multitude of nations. It's kind of like, yeah, you sound like a broken record, God, and I still don't have any kids, except for one with the Egyptian slave girl. No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham. Abram means exalted father. Abraham means father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fertile. I will make nations of you, and kings will stem from you. I will maintain my covenant with you and your descendants and it will be an everlasting covenant. It will never end, right? That's the covenant that we are in. To be your God and the God of your descendants. I will give to you and your descendants after you the land in which you are now residing as aliens. And that's what his promise is. Sarah is also going to get a name change. Let me find this here. Her name is going to go from Sarai to Sarah, and Sarah means queen. Queen, because she's going to be the mother of kings. Makes sense. Who's the mother of the king? The queen, right? And then eventually, he takes a queen of his own. Next chapter. The Lord appeared to Abram by the oak, told you, the oak tree of Mamre, as he sat in the entrance of the tent one day. Looking up, he saw three men standing by. When he saw them, he ran from the entrance and said, bowing to the ground, Sir, if it please you, do not go past your servant. Let some water be brought, etc., and we're going to feed you. We're going to feed you. When God, in verse 17, I'm going to skip down here. I love this part. When God tells Abraham that he's now going to have literally a son in a year, he falls down on the ground laughing. I know, he falls down on the ground laughing. And they're sitting outside of the tent, and Sarah's inside of the tent, and he laughed right in front of them. She hears this, and she laughs inside. So they both laugh their butts off, because they're so old at this point, 99 and 89 years old. And they actually call them out on it, because they're like, why are you laughing? And Sarah says, I'm not laughing. And they say, yes, you are. Like, they know she's in there laughing, right? It's so funny. And they say, a year from now, we will return, and Sarah will have a child. You will have a child. And they name him Isaac. And the name Isaac actually is the name, it's the word that means laughter. Isn't that interesting? It's kind of cool. Isaac means laughter in Aramaic, I guess. And so it's funny because whenever they say their son's name, for the rest of their lives, they're going to remember how they laughed. And it's not like they're condemned because they're laughing. It's just like that was an honest kind of, way to react when you're that old. And that's what happened. The three strangers come. He offers them hospitality, which is the thing. They say, where's your wife? And, they laugh about it.
and their son's name will always remind them of God's promise and the miracle that their son's birth was at that age. And they're going to need to remember that when Abraham is put to the biggest test of his life. And if you've heard this story, which I'm going to read to you. It's a giant thing.
Parents hate this story, and with good reason, because God asks Abraham to do like the unthinkable, right? Which is to kill his own son. The son that he waited 100 years to have. And now he's 113 years old. The kid's about 13 years old. And he says here, now there's really important connections here that we're going to make with the life of Jesus. So just picture the scene if you can, and then I'm going to fill in some of the blanks and I'm going to connect some of the dots. Genesis chapter 22. This is this is definitely the second reading of the Easter Vigil, if you do all of the readings. Sometime after God put Abraham to the test, God said, take your son, your only one, whom you love, go to the land of Moriah. That's important, the land of Moriah. There, offer him up as a burnt offering on one of the heights, one of the hills of Moriah. That's just like a little mountain range, right? Early the next morning, Abraham saddled his donkey, there's a donkey involved, took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac, and after cutting the wood for the burnt offering, set out for the place where God had told him. On the 3rd day, if it's just like ding, 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 okay, that makes, 3rd day, okay, yeah, it's not coincidence. Abraham caught sight of the hill where he's going to take his son. He said to the servants, stay here with the donkey while the boy and I go over there. We are going to worship God and then come back. So you can see right away, Abraham says, we'll be back. Like, whatever happens on that hill, Abram is 100% sure that his son is still going to be okay. Like, does that mean he's going to kill his son and God's going to bring him back from the dead? Perhaps. We don't really know what was going on in this guy's mind, but he says, we will be back. Like, so again, Abram trusts in God, even in like the worst possible human circumstance that you could find as a parent, right? Kill your child. What? So Abraham took the wood and laid it on his son's shoulders. So the son, with the wood on his shoulders, is going to carry it up the hill, right? Does that remind you of Jesus, right? With the cross. He had the cross beam on his shoulders, carrying it up the hill to Mount Calvary, right? And he took the fire and the knife, and the 2 walked on together. Isaac speaks to his father and asks a very logical question. Here I am, and here you are. Here's the fire and the wood, but where is the sacrifice? Where's the sheep that we're going to sacrifice, or the lamb that's going to be sacrificed on the top of this hill, right? And he says, son, God will provide the lamb for the sacrifice. Okay, so then they keep going. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built an altar there, arranged the wood on it, and then put his son on top of the wood on the altar. Then Abraham reached out and took the knife. I mean, he is like this close to actually doing the unthinkable thing. And as soon as he goes like this, like all he has to do is just thrust it down. God says, do not do this. This is not what I'm asking of you. Whew. Right? Like, are you kidding me? Like, how much, I'm glad I wasn't faster. But he said, do not do the least thing to this son of yours, for now I know that you fear God, since you did not withhold even your son from me, your only son. Abraham looked, and he had said, God will provide the lamb for the sacrifice. And he saw in the
the thorns, like the crown of thorns that Jesus had on his head, he saw a ram, which is a male lamb, male, caught by its horns in the thicket. And Abraham took that ram that God had provided and offered it as instead of his son, right? And he says, God has provided on this mountain. No, on the mountain, ready? On the mountain that I'm on right now, the Lord will provide. So that's a futuristic thing. So
What do we want to learn about that? Well, what you may or may not know is that Isaac is now a teenager. Okay? I mean, if I had tried to race any of my students, they would win. I mean, I'm like, 3 times their age at least. And Abraham is well over 100 years old here. So let's just think about this. Isaac consented to this, ultimately. He didn't run away. He could have overpowered his 113-year-old father. So he accepts the will of the Father, right? Just like Jesus, thy will be done. Can this cup pass from me in the Garden of Gethsemane? Can this cup pass from me? If not, thy will be done. So the Son accepted the will of the Father, carried the wood on his shoulders, up that hill. The Father is willing to offer his beloved Son, his only beloved Son. God himself provides the lamb for the sacrifice, right? Finally, the comparisons keep going. The hills of Moriah are actually the hills around Jerusalem. And on one of those hills, the temple in Jerusalem will be built. And they believe that it's actually that hill that the temple was built on, that's where Isaac was going to be sacrificed. But on the next hill over is another hill that will eventually, now thousands of years later, be called Mount Calvary, where Jesus himself will go to the cross for us and be the sacrifice, right? The whole nation would offer sacrifices on that temple mountain. And we think about Mount Calvary as being, that most important place where Jesus went to the cross for us. So this is what I always say to my students, and I'll say to you, that boy was never in any danger. There was never any danger for him, ever. But this is the thing. If I'm going to ask you to do something and you're willing to do it, then I need to be willing to do it too. You know what I mean? If God was willing to ask a human being to do the unthinkable by sacrificing his own son out of faith, in faith, then I always say at that moment, Isaac was never in danger, but Jesus was doomed. And Jesus wasn't even here yet, but the fate of the Son of God was sealed on the day that Abraham was willing to do that. Because if Abraham, a human being like us, flawed, was willing to do the unthinkable, then God, who is all-powerful, had no choice but to do the thing that he asked him to do. So Jesus' fate was sealed that's what I think, at that moment. And Jesus will submit. He's the Father's beloved Son who submits to the will of the Father. The Father's willing to do the unthinkable. He carries the wood on his shoulders up the hill, becomes the sacrifice that Isaac didn't have to be. And God provides the lamb, because what do we call Jesus right before we receive Holy Communion? Lamb of God. We say it 3 times. He's the Lamb of God. That ram in the thicket, becomes then the symbol or the precursor to Christ on the cross for us. He's the one that's offered for our sins. So there's so many parallels with that one story alone in the life of Christ. I'm going to go to verse 15 of that same chapter. A second time, the angel of the Lord called to Abraham. Now, at this point, I'd be like, stop talking to me. Not really. A second time, the angel of the Lord called to Abraham and said, I swear by my very self that because you acted as you did, not withholding from me your only son, I will bless you
and make your descendants as countless as the stars of the sky and the sands of the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the gates of your enemies, etc., etc. At last it seemed that the promised blessings had arrived, right? No matter what, good or bad, successes or failures, God was using the descendants of Abraham to bring salvation to the world. Like now it's set into motion 100%. In chapter 23, I'm not going to read everything to you, but in chapter 23, Sarah dies, and I always make my they think I'm really weird. Like whenever somebody significant in the Bible dies and we get to that, I always say we have to have a moment of silence for that person. So a moment of silence for Sarah, right? The queen, because the mother of kings. She's the mother of kings. She dies at the age of 127. Sometimes it's my phone that goes off, and that's really embarrassing. Sarah dies, and the reason I mention this is really important because this land has been promised to this old guy and to his descendants, but how much of it does he own? Not 1 square inch. Not 1 square inch. So how do I go from not owning any of it to owning it all? I have to start somewhere. And there's this really cool story that probably gets passed over for most of us as Catholics, because, I mean, so many Catholics say all the time, like, how do I not know, like, 90% of this stuff, right? I don't know, because we weren't taught most of it. It skipped around a lot. God had promised that it would be all for him, but he doesn't own any of it right now. So what happens is this. Remember, everybody loves Abraham. He's just this great guy that everybody loves all the time. And now his wife has passed away. And he goes to one of the local landowners, one of the kings, I'm assuming. I forget what they're all, I don't care about all their names. But he goes and he asks, can I buy a burial plot for my wife? And of course he says, oh gosh, Abraham, I'll give you the land for your wife. We all love you. Everybody thinks you're the greatest person ever. You can have as much of it as you want. He only wanted a part of it. He said, I need to buy it from you. I need to buy it from you. Why? I'm going to give it to you. No, I need to buy it from you. And the significance of that is that it's mine. Like you can never take it back. I have a deed with my name on it. This belongs to me. He had to start somewhere. He needed land rights. So it could not be borrowed, therefore it could not be taken back. With Sarah gone right now, and he does have this plot of land, and it's actually their grave. And Abraham, Sarah, and their son Isaac, and his wife Rebekah, and their son Jacob, and his first wife Leah, because he has more than one, are all going to be buried at that same place. So there's generations. Wherever it is, they're all there, right? We'll know on the last day when they come back to life. Okay, so now they have to find a wife. Or he has to find, because Sarah's dead, he has to find a wife for his son. And he looks around, and even though the people in the Holy Land are great, and they're very generous, and he gets along with everybody, he doesn't want a wife from there. He wants it from where he comes from. So he sends his servant, maybe you know this story, I don't know, but he sends his servant to find someone from his own people. And remember now, when they get married to like their cousins, we don't think that that's normal, right? We don't. But like back then, and again, they represent oftentimes a lot more than just themselves. He says, go to my kinsmen, go to the land of my kinsmen, and get a wife for my son from among them, because we know to keep it in the same family, right? So off goes the servant, and as he's nearing the place, and Haran it's called, and it's Haran is the name of the brother, one of the brothers of Abraham, and he's got 2 children. Haran's dead by this time, but so there was Lot's dad, right? And then there was Abraham. Abraham was the oldest. Haran was the next, or one of the other 2. And Haran has 2 children, Lamech
Laban and Rebecca. And he has his brother and sister. These would be Isaac's first cousins, essentially, because their dads were brothers. Pretty sure. Yeah, so as he's nearing the place, he comes to a well. And if you didn't know this, the well in the biblical times is a place where boys and girls would go to like hang out with each other, because boys and girls didn't always hang out with each other. Like you guys stuck with the guys and the girls stuck with the girls. It was very separated. It was just an old-fashioned time. I mean, it's just many thousands of years ago, and you stayed kind of separate. So if you wanted to go on a date, you went to the well, because that's where you would see either the cute guy or the cute girl or whatever, and that's where they would meet each other. So he goes there, and it just so happens that there's this beautiful, of course, they're all drop-dead gorgeous. Even Sarah, when she was like 80, was like, guys were lusting after her and all this stuff. It's just crazy. But so he finds this beautiful girl, and he says, I'm from the household of Abraham, and I'm here on behalf of him and his son Isaac he sent me here to find a wife. And she hears how successful Abraham is and how rich they are and how successful they've been as a family and all that. And so she takes him to, wait, you know what? It's not Laban. Hold on a minute. She takes, I'm getting my generations mixed up here. She takes him to her brother's house, and they decide that and I love this, she can decide if she wants to go and marry this guy. Because back then, with no dad, the brother, I think if you have a brother, you better be nice to him, because he can force you to marry who you don't want to marry. And that's, unfortunate back then, but that's the case. But she consents to it, which is wonderful. It's wonderful. So, so her brother's Laban, and he is, at this time, a pretty good guy. Not always, but he says, do you want to marry cousin Isaac? And she says, I do. So she goes with him, and they get married, and of course they fall madly in love with each other. Everybody immediately falls in love with the first person that they see, I guess. So that's just the way it kind of goes. And so Isaac and Rebecca are love at first sight, and they have twins. Let me check my time here. We're good. I like to get through these generations. The firstborn son in a family is always going to get 2/3 of everything. Fair or not? Who's the firstborn in your family, first of all, right? So we're getting 2/3. If you're a guy, sorry ladies. And everybody else splits the other third. So it's not fair, but so what? That's just, I didn't write the story. So the firstborn receives the lion's share, but the firstborn then, when the father dies, becomes the father and has to take care of everybody else eternally, essentially, okay, for the rest of their lives. So you do get a lot more, but then your responsibilities are a lot more too. The firstborn got the lion's share of the estate and also got a special blessing from the father, a special blessing. So a birthright and a blessing. So Rebecca and Isaac are pregnant. She's going to have twins, and God says to her, there are 2 nations fighting in your womb, because her kids were always like, right? If you have twins in your family, I know some of you do, because we have twins in our family. One is obviously born first, and one is born second. And sometimes, like with a C-section, it can be like 30 seconds. And sometimes it's 5 minutes or 20 minutes, whatever. I was actually present for the birth of twins once. And so how many priests can say that? It's pretty cool. And now they're juniors at Cathedral Prep. So it's been a long time ago. But so the firstborn of twins could mean like I'm the firstborn by just a fraction of time. And when the twins are born, the first comes out is named Esau, and holding on to his heel is Jacob, the second one. So that kind of tells you he's trying to be first. He's aggressive. He's literally trying to kind of pull his brother back to get out first. He wants to be the firstborn. I just love that. He's trying his darndest to be first, but he's second by like a second because he comes right out almost together. Well, the father, Isaac, favored the older brother because he was very manly and very outdoorsy, very sports and hunter, fisherman, and all that stuff. He's a man of the outdoors. His brother Jacob, the younger of the two, was more mild-mannered, stuck around the home a lot more, hung out with the mom a lot more, and she favored him. So each parent kind of has a favorite child. And Jacob, though, always wants to be the firstborn. I think you probably know this story at least a little bit. I'll just refresh your memory of it. When Jacob was there, when they were teenagers, they were both single, I believe, at the time, and Jacob cooked. He was a cook, and he was cooking something delicious smelling, and his brother was out in the fields, and he came home, and he said, give me some of what you just cooked. And his brother Jacob said, the younger one said, give me your birthright, and I'll give you some of this. And it actually is like lentil soup. That's what he made, lentil soup. Very Lenten, a Lenten meal. But he's starving. And I say to the kids, they laugh about this. Sometimes boys don't think with their heads. They think with their stomachs. And sometimes they think even lower, right? I mean, let's be honest. Boys do. And this time he was thinking not with his mind, but with his empty stomach. And he said, okay, you can have my birthright. And he gobbled down that soup and off he went and never thought about it again, really. So we feel kind of bad for him because he traded his birthright for a bowl of beans, but he really didn't seem to care about his birthright. And the scriptures tell us that. They say he didn't really care about his birthright that much. It didn't really. Now, eventually, I think it will, but for now, it isn't. And that was all that Jacob could think about. He was consumed with that, where the guy who had it, didn't even care about it. I'm going to skip to chapter 25 and just look at here. Abraham died. Esau and Jacob are born. He gave him some bread and a lentil stew. He ate it, drank, got up, and went his way. So Esau treated his right as firstborn with disdain. He really didn't care. Now, eventually, he's going to care because he's going to lose more than that. Jacob was thinking long term. So even though we feel bad that he got swindled out of his birthright, we don't really feel that bad because he was thinking only about today, and there's a good lesson there. Think long term. The decisions that and again, I'm not trying to treat you like teenagers, but you can see these are good lessons for teenagers. Like today's decision can either make tomorrow's decisions easy or hard, right? Saturday night out with your friends or with your girlfriend in the backseat of your car, that could mean a lot different. You might have a different decision and a much harder one to make tomorrow than you have to make tonight. It's just, so Esau is that frivolous, can only think of the present moment, and Jacob thinks long term and wisely, right? Now, is he a deceiver? Yes. And do we like to be deceived? No. But it'll come back because we have this thing called karma. And so he'll figure that out. Okay. So Jacob, let me find my place here. In chapter 27, I'm going to read you what happened next. So some years have passed. Esau actually has at least one wife that he took from the neighboring people. So again, his parents were never happy about his choice of wife because they were Canaanites, not from their family line. When Isaac was so old, this is the dad, you've heard this story, that his eyesight had failed, he called his older son Esau and said to him, "My son, now that I have grown old, I do not know when I might die. So take your hunting gear, your quiver and your bow, and go out into the open country and hunt some game for me. Then prepare for me a dish the way I like and bring it to me to eat so that I may bless you." So he's lost his birthright, but he hasn't lost his blessing of the firstborn. And that was like super important, I guess. Rebecca, so the women always are listening through the walls of a tent. It's not that hard. She listens. She goes and says to her favorite, "Trust me, do what I say, and we're going to get you that blessing too." Okay? "I heard your father tell your brother, 'Bring me some game so that I can bless you before I die.' So obey me about what I'm going to tell you to do. Go to the flock, get me 2 choice goats. With these, I'll prepare a dish for your dad. Bring it to him and get the blessing." But Jacob said to his mother, "Esau's hairy and muscular, and I'm smooth-skinned and a lot more mild-mannered. Suppose father goes like this, and he says, 'Where's the hair on your arms? Did you shave the hair off of your arms? What? What's going on?' His mother said, 'Just do what I say, and I'll figure this out.' So she prepared the way he liked it, and then she dressed him up like his brother, and they put the goat skins, it's kind of ridiculous, the goat skins on his hands and on his arms. So now he smells like the brother, and he feels like the brother, and the father is blind and old, so you see what happens. He goes in, and the father blesses the wrong son. And out he goes, because now he has what he wants. He's got the birthright. He's essentially the firstborn son now, right? Because he deceived his brother, and he deceived his father. And then, this is such a sad thing. No sooner is he gone than in comes Esau with his food. Now Esau, his only crime was that he really didn't care that much about things and didn't think that much about things. He was just irresponsible. I mean, is that the worst thing? There's a lot worse things you can be than just don't care that much, right? And in he comes, knowing that this is all he has left to get. And the father had already given the blessing. And once the blessing is given, it cannot be taken back and given to somebody else. Once a blessing is out, it's out for good. You can't take it away from the person. So in he comes, and he says, "I have what you asked me to do." And he's like, "Wait a minute, who was just in here?" And Esau realizes it was his brother, and he is so sad. And it says here, and I always get sad about this, "Have you only one blessing, Father? Bless me too, please." And Esau wept out loud, because now he's grown up enough to realize that he kind of just squandered everything, and he should have started caring about things a lot earlier in his lifetime. He was so mad that, of course, he wants to kill his brother. And we already know that brothers have killed each other in the story before. So it's nothing that we don't think that that couldn't happen. And of course, but the mother comes to the rescue and says to Jacob, "Get out of town until your brother can, settle down or calm down or whatever. Get out of here. Get out of here. Go to my brother Laban's house. Go to Laban's house, and he'll take care of you, at least for now." So Esau is furious, crying. I mean, he's lost everything, and his brother has everything, but now he's on the run. On the way, this is so interesting, and I remember again in my children's Bible from when I was a really little kid that had all the pictures in it. I remember it showed a picture of Jacob sleeping with his head on a rock in the middle of the desert. And it says here that on the way to Uncle Laban's house, he stopped for the night.
and had a strange dream. And in it, it was the renewal of the covenant. God made a covenant with Jacob, which, again, sadly for Esau,
When God makes this covenant with Jacob, that is the official, like the thread is now moved to this brother. Like this one is out of the picture. He was supposed to be the one, but he gave it away. So you can squander God's gifts. And now we officially see Jacob as that on the thread of salvation history. And if you read that genealogy, boy, I'll tell you, it ain't, Esau's not anywhere on there. Nowhere at all.
it's Jacob, right? Abraham was the father of Isaac, who was the father of Jacob. And Esau is a memory, at least for now. He says to him, just like he said to his grandpa, Abraham, I am going to give you the same promises, a land of your own, and this is it, a kingdom, meaning your descendants will be the kings, and you will be a worldwide blessing through your descendants, namely through Jesus. So Jacob is now on the thread. It's a complete shift. But first, Jacob has to get a taste of his own medicine. And that's what happens next. And we still have time for this one final part of the story. When he got near to Uncle Laban's house, he stopped at a well. Imagine that. The same well, right? Jacob's well. You're going to call it eventually. The dating place. And he fell instantly in love with the beautiful girl who was there, whose name was Rachel. She was one of two daughters, Leah the oldest and Rachel being the second. And just like had happened prior, he falls in love with the girl that he meets at the well. And he goes to Uncle Laban, who says, I want to marry your daughter. And he said, well, there's only one problem with that. I have an older daughter. And if you've ever seen like Fiddler on the Roof, they got to marry the oldest ones first. They want to do it in order, right? Whatever their names are, I forget their names. But yeah, we got to go in order. And he's like, but I'm in love with the second oldest one. How about he says, if you work for me, this is his uncle, his mother's brother. If you work for me for 7, biblical number, years, I will give you her to marry. So he works for 7 years. And it even kind of says, like, in the Bible, it went by very quickly for him because he had his heart set on marrying Rachel. He was madly in love with her. And back in those days, and you see where this is going to go, the brides are veiled, heavily veiled, right, for the wedding that night, and in the dark tents and all of that stuff. And they get married. In comes the veiled bride, and they get married, and they go off to their honeymoon tent, which is pitch black, because they're out in the middle of nowhere and there's no street lights or anything like that. And they consummate the marriage, and in the morning when the sun comes up, he rolls over, and who's laying there but the older sister? Can you imagine, right? So the deceiver has now become the deceived. And he is beside himself, but now it's too late. Right? And he married the wrong girl. And Uncle Laban is laughing his butt off now, right? A lot of laughter in this family. And he says to Jacob, if you work 7 more years for me, I'll give you the one you really love. And he works 7 more years, again, which fly by as quickly as possible because he has his heart set on the second daughter. And it says that, it doesn't say that Rachel or that Leah was like ugly or anything like that. Like, it just said, you know what it says about her? It says she had dull eyes, right? Dull eyes. Like she just didn't have that spark. She just didn't have that. You know, you can see the soul of a person, they say, through their eyes. And her eyes just didn't really do it for him. But now he has 2 wives, which we know is never a good idea. And now he's finally got the girl that he loves. However, we know that there's probably going to be trouble down the road, at least for the girls, Because nobody wants to be like one of a bunch of wives, right? I mean, you just want to be just one person, right? You want to be with one person. 13 children later, and here's the thing, history repeats itself.
And what happens is this. Leah knows that her husband loves her younger sister best. But she can't have children, at least for a while. So the older one has the children, has 2 or 3 children, and then stops having children for a while. So now neither of his wives can have children. So what happens? The same thing that Sarah did with Abraham, because they want more kids. Leah, gives her maidservant to her husband, who he takes as his third wife, has a few kids with her. Not to be outdone, Rachel, who has no children, gives her maidservant to Jacob. Jacob now has 4 wives, not 2, 4, who then has children with him. Then, all of a sudden, now that all the other women have children and don't feel like second rate, even though he's only really in love with the one, now that everyone's safe with their own families, now she all of a sudden starts having kids. And she has the famous son, Joseph, with his multicolored coat. Sadly, and a lot of people don't know this, sadly, she will die in childbirth with the 12th son. And a lot of people don't know that. They also had a daughter. Does anybody ever hear of their daughter? Does anybody? No, I know why, right? But as a teacher at Villa for all those years, do you think I can skip the daughter? No, I have to make sure that the girls know about the daughter. Her name is Dinah, like Dinah Shore. Many of you would remember her from television. So they were 12 sons and 1 daughter somewhere in the middle. She was in the middle. But Rachel, the loved favorite wife, died. And listen to this. Isn't this an interesting thing? She is not buried in the cave with Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, and eventually where Jacob and the oldest daughter, Leah, will be buried. She's buried outside of Bethlehem. Bethlehem. I mean, okay. And we don't even know, we have no idea that Jesus is coming and that's where he's going to be born. But, oh, highly favored daughter, Mary, going to give birth to the Savior in Bethlehem. And Rachel was the highly favored daughter of Laban. You know what I mean? So we can still connect like crazy all of these stories. But before that happens, because Benjamin is the baby. Benjamin and Joseph. Joseph's number 11 of the sons, and Benjamin is the 12th. But before he is born, Laban and Jacob start having problems because there's too many. Jacob's flocks are growing because God is favoring him, and Laban's flocks are shrinking because Laban's a deceiver too now. And so God will always have to bless Jacob because he's the one that he has a covenant with. God has the covenant, right? When the shift happened. So Laban and his sons, so the brothers of the wives, start to get angry and they start thinking about plotting against Jacob. And now he's got a young family to provide for. He's got 4 wives and at this point 12 children, 11 sons and a daughter. And he has a vision and God says it's time to go back home. Because they've been living in that old place, where they all came from. He says it's time to go back to the land that I'm going to give you and your family. And so they pack up. When Laban and his sons are out in the field somewhere far off, a couple days away, they pack up their little family of 12 children and 4 wives, and they get out of there. And Laban comes home to find that everything is gone, Rachel took her father's little statues. He prayed. He would line up all his statues of little wooden carved gods. He was a pagan. And there, becoming monotheistic, right? They're like the first monotheistic family that only ever had one God that they served. So when Laban came back, he was mad that his daughters and all of his grandchildren were gone, but he was really mad that his statues were gone. And he followed them, and he caught up with them. And this is really cool. Rachel is the only one she's the one who stole the statues. And she put them underneath a pillow, and she sat on the pillow in her tent. It was in the women's tent. So when women had their period, that's where they had to go into that tent, right? They stayed in there. There's a book called The Red Tent. It's worth reading. It's a really good book. And it's about that tent. It's about this whole family, actually. It's really cool. It's fictional, but it's got a lot of biblical truths in it. And Laban searched the entire camp. All the kids, all the wives, everybody's tents, couldn't find his statues. He went into that tent, which he wasn't really supposed to go into because that woman was unclean at the time, right? And he said, are my things in here? And she said, no, it's just me, and I'm sitting on my pillow, and I can't move because it's my womanly time. So he quickly backed out of the tent, and she had put them under. The only place that they could be, that he could not find them, is where they were. So, everybody's kind of deceiving each other in this family. But they're still our family, right? They're still our family. And so Laban and Jacob basically shake hands and decide that they're going to be okay with each other. They're not going to fight with each other. The God's statues are gone. Nobody knows. It's a mystery, except for to Rachel. And he says, I still want to be in your life. And he's like, I'm not trying to, I'm doing what God told me. I'm going back to my native place. He says, all right, well, I don't like it, because nobody wants their family to move away. And I hate that my nephews live in Florida. It's a long way away, but that's life. And he says, all right, go in peace, and I'll go home, you go home, it's all good. So Uncle Laban and the uncles leave, or the cousin, the brothers, the little kids' uncles. And this is where we're probably going to stop for today. I'll leave you with a cliffhanger, just like in the old movies, Saturday afternoon movies, right? So they are on their way again, on their way back to the Holy Land after how many years? It's been at least, it was 14 years just to have the two wives and then all the children. And they're still probably teenagers and down, but still a lot of time has passed. And word comes from some messengers that Esau is on his way to meet him with 400 men. So just picture it. I always say this is definitely a case of out of the frying pan and into the fire, because I just narrowly escaped from Uncle Laban and the brothers who were very on the edge of wanting to hurt us. And now we're at peace with them, they're gone, and now we're going to be faced with my brother who, 20 years ago or whatever it was, we don't really know, who I deceived out of his birthright and out of his blessing. And he's got 400 men, and I have 4 women and a daughter and 11 sons, because Benjamin wasn't born yet. So, yeah, that's how they're going to get back home, where Bethlehem actually is, before she gives birth to her final son and dies and is buried after childbirth. So we'll go from there, and we'll see how has Esau changed? This is like the end of a Batman episode, right? Will our caped crusader get killed by a stomp? Okay, thanks for being here. See you next time, too. That's great. No, thank you. Good. And again, if anybody missed last week that and it's like, should I still go? We kind of started over with a new section.